Moi! Tämä on Northwind Talks, jossa keskustellaan pintaa syvemmin seurakunnasta ja uskon elämästä. Tervetuloa ja let's go!
Well, welcome back everyone to the Northwind Talks podcast. If you're listening to my voice and not seeing my face, I will remind you we are also on YouTube. But hey, nice to have you here. This episode is going to be in English. Big love to all of our internationals. I know that you love us right now. We love you too. We are doing a series on the culture of wonder. We had a sermon series on that as a church last fall. And we wanted to expand on that because culture is not something that, you just hear about it once and then you just live it suddenly. No, culture is something that you intentionally sustain through the way that you live, and you sustain it by your practice so long that it becomes habitual. To the point, as a community, where someone new can be introduced to the community, and even though anyone mentions, like, hey, we have this and this type of culture, you just pick it up. If you go to pick any sort of natural culture in the sense of a nation. You go to Italy, you very quickly see what Italian culture is like. You go to Brazil, you see what Brazilian culture is like, etc. So we as a church, we want to have a culture as a community that embodies these particular themes specifically. So speaking about the Wonder series, we had worship, ownership, which we're talking about today, nearness, discipleship, emotional health, and revival and reformation. So these are themes that we hope as a community to really embody in the way that when someone shows up, they would say that, oh, wow, worship is really, it's not just something that we do on a Sunday, it's actually part of who we are and how we practice our faith. And today we're speaking specifically about a culture of ownership. And I have with me two of my dear friends. I'm so happy to have them here. We have Viivi.
Hello.
You've seen her on the podcast before. And Andre.
Hello, thank you.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick for those who have never heard of you?
Do you want to go first?
Okay, yeah. So my name is Andre. I've been with Northwind about from the beginning, 2017, I guess it was, and been mostly part of the worship team as a bassist. But I don't know, me and my wife, Messi, she's a dancer as well. We've been part of this church and we love it, and we give a lot of our lives to this, and it's really important.
Amazing.
Andre does a lot more than just the worship team, by the way. He's
I'll
also on our media team, helps us with a lot of audio and tech stuff, and a very vital person in our community.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm Viivi Grosvenor, Finnish, grew up in Israel, met my husband when living in England, and then we moved to Finland. I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been at Northwind since 2018 and a member of the media team and the worship team.
Amazing.
And
so
staff.
happy to have you guys here.
Thank you. First time here.
I'm excited. This topic is one of my personal favorites, along with many others, I'm sure. But this is a topic that, first of all, obviously both of you guys really embody this. That's why you're here. But I care about this topic deeply because I would not be where I am in life as a person if it had not been for learning to walk in this in my own personal life, having a personal culture of ownership in my own life. By the way, I'm Samu. If you've never met me, I'm a pastor at the church and father and husband and many things. We'll talk later. But let's start here. How do you define ownership? And yeah, let's just start there. How would you define ownership? What is that?
Maybe we can start. Yeah, we can start.
Sure. Well, a big question to start off the episode with. Let's go
Jumping
to the
in
deep
with
end.
both feet, right?
I think for me, ownership is about taking responsibility and showing up where you are called to show up, and showing up with excellence where you are called to show up.
Right.
That's how I would summarize it.
I find that a really good definition because it doesn't really embody that like we own this church. You didn't say that.
No.
And I think that's like my definition is that Jesus owns everything, you know, and he entrusted some of those things to us. And as you said, we can be responsible for those things. I think it's a lot about like, you know, having a deep respect for God's things.
That's a really good point that you mentioned, Andre, where you know, you take the parable of the talents or the mina.
Yeah.
The master shows up and the servants say, "Look, master, your mina has made 5 more or 10 more," where we are stewarding something that belongs to him, and now specifically in relation to the local church. It's funny that I agree in the sense that ownership doesn't mean that I act as though I own the thing, but I treat it as though I really do believe that God owns the thing, but he's put it in my hands, which then I don't want to be the guy with the 1 talent who goes and buries it. But yeah. Maybe we'll get back to that later.
I think really often though we also look at that like parable and we think about it only in accordance to our finances, and we think about it with ownership as well, where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to be a good steward of the money that I'm given. Like, but actually I want to broaden that idea that it's about all of our resources. It's about our well-being. How do we steward our well-being? How do we steward our relationships? How do we steward our time well and take ownership, take responsibility, and steward well.
Can we talk a bit about the different ways? Okay. Let me phrase it this way. I feel like ownership is not something that you either have or you don't have. I don't think it's binary in that sense. I think that there's different levels to it, in the sense that you can see the church in a lot of different ways. You can have a certain mindset, whether that would be similar to going to see a show or going to a restaurant or whatever else. How do you feel like what sort of mindsets are available in a sense, or how do you see the church in that respect? And what attributes to I guess growing in that? You get what I mean?
Yeah. So I used to have like another phase of my Northwind membership where I thought in a different way. I was very proactive, kind of like I am today, but I had this sense that like, hey, I want to bring my part. You know, I want to do my thing. I want to make this better by doing my thing. And I think that it was dangerous. So I had problems. Because what if you bring something and it's rejected by the leaders or something?
Right.
How do you feel about that, you know? Then you feel like, maybe I shouldn't do my things since it's not accepted, you know? And that can be a pain point for people because they're doing this voluntarily. So they're not being paid and they sense that it's their own. But nowadays, like I have a different perspective, which is everything is like, I don't have my part.
Right.
There's no part of like my ideas that I want to bring to the table. It's everything comes from God and is for God. So the leadership that Northwind that God put for Northwind, like you and Ho and Sarah and everybody, I like that comes from God.
Sure.
And if the leadership says no to that, I take that as God's answer, you know, and like to my idea. You know, if I bring an idea and you guys say no, I understand that this is God's no, you know. So when we have that perspective, there really is like no stress or no rejection. It really just flows where you listen to God and you listen to leadership, which is God speaking. Even if you guys are not perfect, you know, God uses your imperfection sometimes.
100%. I mean,
You
thank
know
God.
that.
I mean, I give him a lot to work with.
Yeah, well, that's what I have to say about this.
But that's really good. I actually just today I was having a conversation with Susu where I mentioned like, hey, I'm thinking if I should do this thing. It was just an idea that I had, and I could tell that it was not something that she had in mind. And the conversation where it very quickly went was that I said that, look, I'm not fixated on doing what I want because I don't want to have the situation where it's like what I want versus what you want and our desires are competing. I just want to do what God wants. And And she was like, yes, that's a really good idea, because that takes so much of the stress off of this needs to look a certain way, or this needs to happen. Otherwise, X, Y, or Z.
But I think that requires really catching a hold of a vision, though, and like catching hold of what a collective culture looks like and being a part of it, and then being willing to die to yourself in that process, right? Like, so to be willing to set your own ego aside because you don't care about seeing your own like thing fulfilled, and you just care about building with other people, building what is happening, what God has called you all to do collectively. But it all starts with just catching a vision, like catching what God is speaking in the moment. And like that comes really strongly from leadership, like being able to communicate well, being able to bring people in, being able to like articulate well what the vision is.
Sure.
And then people are able to build in alignment with one another, where there is no competition with one another, but we are just actually collectively the same body.
Yeah.
I just realized that is great. Although I'm thinking it can be quite stressful for the normal Christian to think that I have to volunteer in church with the right motivations. How can we get to those? How can we get to that motivation where we're like searching for excellence, we're responsible, we are following the leader's visions and the vision for the church in general? Like how do we live a life of like plenty full of joy when we're doing those things, Like maybe we should talk about joy.
Joy is a big deal.
Yep.
And actually, wait, I think we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But before we go to that, just to backtrack, the question that I just posed about how we view the church, that taking it back to what you just said, that it requires, okay, if we talk about consumerism versus contributing, that I think these are two, that this is that question for me is relatively binary in terms of how I see the church as a whole. That do I see the church mainly as I'm going to show up and I'm going to see what I can, like, what's in it for me. Yeah. Versus I'm going to show up and I hope that I can be a blessing to somebody. I don't know. What do you think? Is that binary?
No, that's
it's maybe not that binary.
It's maybe not. I think that what I would say with that is it goes along with the like needing to catch the vision, where you need to experience something yourself first before you can be that for other people, right? So you need to be able to come into a culture and receive in order for you to give. But I think what you're talking about in terms of getting stuck in a culture, or like getting stuck in the receipt mode with the consumerism idea, is the whole concept that we never move on to maturity, where we never move on to then giving to other people or being a part of building or being a part, but we're always stuck on what's the next thing I can get, essentially. So yeah, I think that it all starts from you needing to receive, you needing to see people actively involved, and then you need to also catch a vision of what this adds to your life when you do build, when you do get to like come in through the door, when you are a gift. Like you do also get a lot in that process, And I think that we've...
What do you get?
What do you get? Well, for me personally, it's been, I get family, I get belonging, I get like deeper connection, I get input into my life.
Do you get a deeper sense of purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's cool.
Why not?
I mean, it sounds good.
It's all available. I think that really at the end of the day, what I get is community and fellowship. What I get is being a part of building something other than just myself. And so that is huge.
Do you feel like consumerism actually inhibits that sense of belonging?
I think so, because you're so focused on me-centric behavior, you're not able to be a part of a collective.
That's so good. I actually haven't seen that connection before, but when you mentioned it, I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. 100%.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this question because, like, if everything is done in relation to our relationship with God, one day you can be a consumer. God can say consume, Sure. The other day he can say contribute. And I think if someone is coming to church always with the same idea of I'm going to consume, I think it's probably just their own idea of what church should be. But as long as you have a relationship with God, like that's like all the time on, you know. Sometimes God says like, hey, sit down and just receive. You're
100%.
very tired. You might burn yourself out soon. You know?
For sure.
And sometimes he's like, hey, keep on doing these things. And if you think you're going to burn out, trust in me, you know, because he knows our boundaries. I reached that word now that you wanted to talk about boundaries, but he knows all these things, you know.
Yeah.
So we don't basically need to worry at all. And it's just been very refreshing to me that God is active in all of the things that we do and all of the tiny details. And if you're ever like worried, like should it be this or that, then you just ask God, is it A or B? And then he's like, A, or is it B? And you know, and then you just go full on with that answer.
Yeah. And I think there's also a level, or there's a mode of understanding that we can still receive while still being a part of a collective.
Absolutely.
Or like
amazing,
it's our this is coming in the second episode. This was raised in the worship episode as well. But like our media team models that, right? Like the people who show the lyrics, they're receiving during worship as well.
100%.
They're fully 100% like
I'm
involved
receiving
in
during
it.
worship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Us as the worship
I receive
team.
while preaching.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I preach to
Preach to
myself,
yourself,
you know.
yes.
100%, and that comes from understanding what you were talking about of like God is always present, God is always giving, he's always willing to give. And sure, there are different seasons, and you go through different seasons. Obviously, when I have a newborn, it's not going to look the same as when I was single and able to do a lot more or a lot different types of stuff with no restrictions. But that doesn't mean that you're giving any more or less value to the church. It just means that the things that you're doing are different in different seasons. And I think this all comes down to like the Bible verse that talks about like 1 Corinthians 12, I think it is, where we're talking about like different members of the body and like being joined together and understanding that you're a hand, I'm a foot or whatever, you know what I mean? And like understanding that we all come together to build a body that moves with its own ligaments, you know? Yeah, and everybody is needed because without the other person, we're not able to have the same amount of impact.
100%. You mentioned the need for experiencing something in order to grow in it. Can we talk about this growth thing a bit? Like, what do you think, besides experiencing, what would you say, like again, I'm curious for
Resilience.
For the resilience.
I'm the only one here.
Where does ownership come from? What's the distinguishing difference between people who take ownership? Okay, let's say take ownership. Let's define taking ownership. So I would say that a person who, and you're free to comment, but I would say that a person who takes ownership, one person, they see trash on the floor and they pick it up. One person sees trash on the floor and they think, somebody else will pick it up. So what is the difference between these two? Like, how did they end up there? What do you think? Besides just experiencing it, is there something that happens inside of us, something that we understand that causes this?
Choosing that you want to be a part of a solution. I would say like if I can bring like for so many years I was a member of this congregation without actually doing anything. Firstly, because I was going through extremely deep things in my life and processing, and I wasn't in a place where I could give. But the reality is that I've done that transformation like in this church. And it came down to a choice. It comes down to, do I want to be a part of bettering this, or do I want to sit back and watch and hope that somebody else takes action?
Right.
And I think that also comes down to learning to listen to God, learning to listen to where he's calling you. And this is something that I raised when you were actually doing the sermon on this before, where it was the whole point of like, when we see a need, usually it's because God is calling us to take action in that place, or calling us at least to find somebody to take action in that place. Because most likely nobody is you, nobody has your experience, nobody sees those blind spots.
I mean,
and
oftentimes,
you can prevent a road accident from happening, a deer hitting the headlights.
Yeah. Our annoyances are often gifts to the body if we do something about them.
But if we just sit back, actually you're causing hurt and pain down the road.
100%.
You're just having that manifest to multiple people.
I'd like to add to that. So you said choose. I would say the same word, but I'll also say choose to obey. Choose to obey God, you know? So there's been a moment when, like, God told me, like, wash the dishes in this kitchen. And I just like, okay, let's wash the dishes. And, but it was a matter of obedience. There's all kinds of motivations we can wash the dishes with.
Sure.
We could be like, oh, no one in this church is washing the dishes. I'm going to go wash the dishes, you know, that kind of stuff. Or you could be like, whoa, my father told me to wash the dishes. I'm going to wash the dishes. And you have to understand everything that God tells us to do is the best possible for us, for our benefit. So I go wash dishes and God is speaking me through the dishes. You know, he's telling me stuff. And all of that I could not receive if I had gone here and sat for the preaching, you know. It can seem like, oh, if I'm sitting here, then I'm receiving. But it could be that I sit here and God is not telling me anything through the preaching, and I'm just looking at other people
Because
thinking,
he told you to be somewhere
because he
else,
told me his presence is in the dishes. Because he told me to do the dishes.
I love that. His presence is in the dishes.
Yes,
love it.
but
So
if he
good.
Man,
says,
next time I'm doing the dishes, I'm just gonna.
if he says, don't do the dishes, go sit here and listen to the preaching, I'm going to come here and listen to the preaching.
Because you could get stuck on, no, but you know, I saw it and I should.
Someone
Whatever
should.
else. Yeah.
It's fascinating. You could just trust in God and all these things. And I have to emphasize, it is amazing to wash dishes with God. Like, think of a famous person that, like, everybody, like, has some famous person that we'd love to spend a day with, you know. Just think of whatever name comes to your mind.
Paul.
Anyway, you know, if you would have one day with Paul,
Jesus.
but you have to
Hey.
spend, but your condition is like, you have to wash dishes with me. You would wash dishes with them, you know? You would be like, yeah, I'm with him. Because it's not about
Absolutely.
the dishes. It's about, hey, I get to be with you. So it's not, there's just so much relationship in all the things that he asks us to do.
Every wife is like, I'm going to make my husband listen to this podcast episode.
I feel the spirit.
God is in the dishes.
The
love
presence is in
So
the
good.
dishes.
So good.
I would add to what you guys said. I agree with these entirely. I think that belief systems impact this a lot, especially
Yes.
around whether I believe that I'm powerful. I think that that's a really
Yes.
key one. Like, if I see my life as a whole as an attempt to just survive and just make it,
Yes.
just by the skin of my teeth, you know, just one day at a time, Lord Jesus, is all I ask of you. If that's my Christian walk, then it becomes very difficult to step outside of myself. And I feel like I've preached on this a ton in our services, but I think it is a huge blessing when we, and it originates in faith. Often God will ask us to do things before we, like, he'll say, hey, I call you powerful, but we don't feel powerful. And then he asks us to do something as though we are powerful, even though we don't feel like
To
it.
grow
And we don't
you.
completely, and then once we do it, because he told us to do it, and then it works out, and we're like, oh my God, I'm powerful. I guess it's true.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's so important that we don't try and just do something on the outside as a social, you know, community, religious, whatever exercise, but that it's something that has to be real for us.
Yeah, 100%.
That the only way that I can take ownership in a community, in an organization, because we are also that, is that I live with ownership in my own life.
Yes, 100%.
Can we talk about that for just a second?
Yeah.
If you want to share just your own personal story with ownership in your own life, I know that Viivi, you spoke about this a bit on your own episode in the past.
Yeah.
But give us the condensed version. Have you always been a person who's like, I see this problem, I want to fix it? Or is this something that you've grown in?
I guess to some degree I've been a person who likes to be proactive in fixing problems, but the attitude has changed recently to realize that like there are so many moments that are God-given. Like the moments are special. In fact, I would say that every day is special, and we just need to open our eyes a little bit more. And God has shown me how how finite life is and how finite like some things are. So like just a little example, I left the Northwind some 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was sad. But
It was.
I mean, there was one Sunday when I played in the worship team in Apollonkatu. I did not know that was the last Sunday I would play in that church.
Right.
God gave me something very special in that Sunday, something very special. So there's so many moments in our life that it is our very last moment in a certain place or situation or with people, and we don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
There was there was one day when my sister, me and my mom and my dad, us four, were in the same car. And that was the very last day.
Right.
And we did not know it.
Wow.
And I think God wants to highlight things to us, and he asks us to like take ownership in this area now. Own it. Own it. Do it great, Speak about deep things. Tell people you love them. There was the day when I left Brazil to come to Finland. I was in the airport with my parents.
Like originally when you came?
Yes, like when I moved to Finland.
What year was that?
2010.
Okay.
I moved to Finland to start studies here. I knew in my heart that I would end up getting a job and staying here, and etc. My parents were a little bit skeptical, kind of like, we don't know, maybe you come back, maybe whatever. But I knew in my heart, and I knew that in the airport, that was the very last day. And I had my mom and my dad to say bye to. And I just looked them in the eyes and I say, by the way, I love you, And I think I said thank you. But yeah, these are important. Yeah. God gives us these moments, and there's sometimes we think, there's going to be a next time when I can do this. No, do it,
Yeah.
I've had a couple of different stories, but I want to pass my turn, so it's not just
it's beautiful.
not just me.
It's so good. I think ownership in relationships is something like what you were talking about that I've had to grow in a lot. I wouldn't say that I am naturally necessarily the most ownership-y person. But I've cultivated it a lot over the years, and I would say thank you, Mom and Dad, for teaching it to me, and for being like putting blinders on a horse, basically, to like teach it to go straight. And it's something that I've seen them model really beautifully, and therefore caught the vision of it for my life of what it can add to me. But relationships is very much like an area that I've struggled with in the past in terms of taking ownership. Or like taking ownership of the fruit that will come from your relationships, if that makes sense. What you're sowing into it. I lived a long time in just kind of like passivity of like, okay, well, some people you connect with, some people you don't. And if you don't connect with them immediately, it's like, okay, get out of here. You know what I mean? I'm just going to focus on my few. And to realize that actually I've missed out on so much over the years of what those people had to give into my life, because I was only associating with people who I just got on with really well, So at some point, God started talking about this a lot to me, where it was like, I had for years put myself in like, this is just my personality. I'm just a very strong person. And like, I say things how it is. And like, that's just who I am. Only to realize that I was producing death, like in other people and in relationships around me, and in communities around me, like because of that. So I think when you start to realize that there are consequences to your actions that you are doing right now, regardless of if you're taking ownership or not.
Yep.
And you start to see what the fruit is of what you are doing, it becomes quite easy to start taking ownership and do things the right way, because you're starting to realize that you actually have responsibility for the outcome of what's going to happen.
That's really powerful what you just said. I've just recently read through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the big boys, and some of the little prophets as well, tiny prophets. And there's actually this repeating theme throughout them where God reminds them that, by the way, if I tell you something to tell the people, and you tell them, you warn them, and they do it anyway, their death is on them. But if I tell you and you don't tell them,
Yeah.
and they do it, their death is on you.
Exactly.
So there is this element of, like you said, that the way that I live, whether I am showing up or not showing up, I am making a difference.
Yeah.
You know, for better or worse. And by the grace of God, I hope that I hope that at the end of my life, I will have given as much room as possible for the grace of God to work through my life.
Yeah.
Not so much like I took so much responsibility and so much ownership and I did all this stuff, but again, I think it's beautiful how you guys frame this, the taking of ownership, this idea of living with responsibility as really a gateway to deeper union with God.
Yeah.
Really, because
It is.
John 17, Jesus says, "This is eternal life, the Father that might know you and your Son whom you have sent." Like, that's the point.
Yeah.
So everything in life ultimately should be about that. And this is one major theme, because if we want to be disciples of Jesus, then we want to imitate his way of life. And I think we all agree that the cross is like super central to the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he embodies, like the cross of Jesus, nothing embodies responsibility and ownership
Yes.
like this, where he literally owns the mess of all of humanity
Yeah.
Yeah.
on himself. And he's like, hey, here I am.
Yeah.
God owns all kinds of things. He owns our feelings. Like, if you have sorrow, give it to God. You know, if you have confusion, you know, give it to God. It's like, hey, here's my stuff. If you're feeling happy, give it to God. You know, if you're blessed with a lot of money, give it to God. I like to think of like God planning our life. Okay, so God is infinite. Think of something very vast, like the ocean. Okay, that's kind of a little bit perspective of what God is. And then you think of a luggage.
Like a suitcase?
Yeah, it's very small and finite. And then God is like, I need to fit in this luggage your life. Because your life, in God's perspective, is like this size.
Sure.
For us, it's 80 years. Oh, I can do all kinds of things. These friends are going to exist forever. That's going to be there forever. But for God, no. This is like, I have placed this shirt in there and this shoe there. And he gives us so much of sitting in the car, driving to places, going to the supermarket. He puts all these stuff that like we would probably not put, you know, but he's preparing all of that for us. And it shows God's character in how much of mundane stuff exists in our routine. It shows his character, that he's humble, actually. He is very simple. And every day is special. So if I'm frustrated because I thought the day should go like this, God is like, actually, I planned this day to be like this. And you just have to stop and be, okay, God, I give you this day with this frustration and this disappointment. What do you want me to do? And then he's going to tell you something. I think a lot of us here in Finland, we want to know why. You know, why did God say this? Because of this and this and that, and it's going to turn out to be good like that. Sometimes God just tells you
He just
something.
won't tell you.
And you're just like, I'm going to go with this. He said it. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it's so like obeying God has to be fun, because because if he is good and eternal and infinite, and he gave his son for us, and he's good, right? Like, if I do the things that he asked me to do, he's not just like playing me as a puppet. He is wanting the best for me. So if you take ownership of that in those moments, everything just flows, and it's just so nice and easy.
Viime syksynä me koettiin meidän ystävien kanssa, että Jumala pyytää meitä laajentamaan telttakangastamme. Monien samankaltaisten sanojen ja profetaalisten kuvien kautta me ymmärrettiin, että maassamme tullaan pian korjaamaan paljon ikuista satoa, ja valmistautumisen aika sadon vastaanottamiseen on nyt.
Me ollaan tehty tilaa niin paljon kuin me pystytään sillä, mitä meillä on nyt käsissämme. mutta ensi vuonna me tullaan tarviin lisää tilaa. Meidän aika nykyisissä tiloissa on tulossa päätökseen ja meidän tavoite on siirtyä ensi vuonna uusiin tiloihin. Tätä muuttaa varten me aloitetaan Increase 2025 keräys.
Enemmän kuin koskaan aiemmin me kuulemme uutisia uskontuloista maassamme. Omassa kontekstissamme voimme myös todistaa, se on totta. Ihmiset Suomessa kääntyvät Jumalan puoleen.
Meidän seurakuntaan tulee uusia nuoria joka viikko ja he kaipaavat saada kokea Jumalan todellisuutta omassa elämässään. Kasvua on nähtävissä monin eri tavoin. Meillä on paljon nuoria lapsiperheitä ja lapsia syntyy enemmän kuin koskaan aiemmin. Noin vuoden aikana meidän seurakuntaan on syntynyt ja tulee syntymään 14 uutta vauvaa.
Wow. Myös meidän rukoushuoneella rukouskokouksissa kävi vuosia vain muutama ihminen. Nyt tiistai-illat ovat täynnä janoisia nuoria ja myös vanhoja ihmisiä. Nämä merkit todistavat yhä lähemmäksi tulevasta hengen sateesta maassamme. Tätä varten meidän täytyy raivata lisää tilaa.
Me uskotaan, että Jumala on erottanut niitä isiä ja äitejä, jotka sanovat kuin Daavid. Ja vielä, koska Jumalani temppeli on minulle rakas, minä luovutan omistamani kulta- ja hopea-aarteet Jumalani temppeliä varten.
Seurakuntamme ja liikehdintämme on nuori ja täynnä niitä, jotka ovat kuin Salomo, valmiina rakentamaan. Me kutsumme nyt niitä, joille Jumala on puhunut, tulemaan mukaan rakentamaan temppeliä hänelle Northwindin kautta.
Meidän seurakunta on myös siunannut paljon koko Suomea, ja me halutaan jatkaa sitä työtä. Lahjoita Increase 2025 keräykseen ja tue meitä, jotta me voidaan levittää telttakangastamme vielä laajemmalle.
Aika rakentaa on nyt!
I think that's a theme that we see, especially in the book of Proverbs, where over and over it talks about the way of the wise and the way of the fool. And I think Proverbs is amazing in the sense that it gives us so much of like, you put in these inputs and this is the output that you're going to get. You live this way, here's what happens. You fear God, this will happen. Obey God, this will happen. Trust God, this will happen. And I think that this as well, that if you do what God says, if you set your heart to be obedient, then joy is gonna absolutely follow. I mean, I don't think, certainly in my life, there's been a lot of moments where I'm not like super psyched in the moment. And oftentimes obedience, it doesn't feel nice in the moment, because I think there might be like sometimes in taking ownership, specifically with like God asks me to do something in the community, like in my case, let's say I am going through a really difficult week. I'm just having the worst week, but I'm scheduled to preach. There's been so many weeks, you know, you might have known it when you came on a Sunday, that I was having a garbage week, and up until like 1 p.m. before the 4 p.m. service, I'm seeing if somebody else could preach instead. And God's like, no, you should go anyway. My strength is made perfect in weakness.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's really good, because I think that it's really easy when we talk about ownership for people to start feeling like, oh, it's striving, or oh, it's like, it's, you guys are talking about striving, and it's like a lot of effort and it's so hard, you know? But like in actuality, working hard is a principle that's modeled in the Bible, and like doing things that are hard grows us. Even when we don't feel like it. A lot of the time, for example, as a business owner, a lot of the time when we've seen exponential growth in our business is when we're having incredible
work.
Yeah, exactly, exponential work, or like really, really hard times that force us to make really drastic changes or really drastic like movements forward. But it can be really easy to get like stuck in this, okay, well then I just gotta do like mentality, and then you forget about you also, when we talk about ownership, being responsible for your well-being and for you first before you can give. Like you can't give from a vessel that's empty. And if you're just showing up, but you're never tanking up at home from the presence, from being with him, you're obviously going to burn out. Like that's just going to happen along the way. So I think that that's like one of the really key things is like remembering that we also have responsibility in our own time. And what you were talking about in terms of like mundane moments, I think that it's really important to understand that we actually have more resources than we think we do in terms of our time, in terms of our capacity, in terms of all of those things. And usually it's just a system problem.
Yeah.
Like we just haven't systematically.
Hey, all my system people.
Make a list.
Well, yeah, no, but we haven't looked at what are those mundane moments that we can bunch together and do them all at once, save time in the week and make time elsewhere, or wake up earlier. You've been talking about this on your social media every now and again, like going to bed earlier so I can wake up earlier so that I can be with God and make time for him in my like mundane moments, because that's where we tank up so that we can give, so that we can be an outpouring, a blessing to other people.
So I was saying how like obeying God is easy and fun. There's obviously been a lot of times when I've been I've had a very hard year.
Same.
And there's many times when I said, God, take this away. And he did not.
He's like, no, you're good. You're good.
Remove this thorn from my spine.
There are many times when I reacted to God in a very bad way. Many times, a couple of times. But the most recent development, or like most recently when I felt bad, God said like, I'm not going to take it away, or the bad feeling or the difficulty. I'm going to be with you all the time. You can't be without me. You can't do this without me. You just can't. And that assurance is also good, because it might be difficult, but you are with God. You know, he's there. You're with the eternal, infinite, sovereign, powerful one.
Yeah.
You know? So there's no fear in that, even though it's difficult. And that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to like when things are difficult, it can feel really difficult to show up, like what you're talking about. And I've felt it this year. Like I've had an incredibly difficult year. God called me at the beginning of the year to give 1 day a week to Northwind, to be on staff and to do what he told me to do. It would have been really easy multiple times this year to be like, actually, I need to take that time and focus on X, Y, and Z because these are where my life is falling apart. But God called me. God asked me. And then I stay in what he asked me to do, regardless of what the other circumstances look like. It would be really easy to stop doing certain things that I do for our worship team and stuff like that weekly, just because it feels uncomfortable that week, or I'm having to slot it into a time and crunch and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. But again, that has negative outcome. So it's understanding that each situation that you come into is a choice. It's a choice to grow. It's a choice to expand your capacity. It's a moment where you have ability to take ownership of the outcome, produce something that is fruitful and can multiply, which is what we have been called to do. And I think that goes more than just for having children. Or you can choose to produce death.
Anything you want to add?
No.
Because I had a completely different topic
You can go there.
in mind. Honestly, I forget what I was going to say, but you just reminded me I had a thought about what you just said, and then he reminded me about another topic, and then I was thinking about that topic, and now I forgot what I was going to comment. For you. Because, hey, today was a great example where I have an epic man flu right now. I didn't want to show up today. Oh, here's what I wanted to say, is that when you stick with what God originally said, you do eventually see the fruit of it. And you do see the reward of it. That it might not be super duper in the moment. Like, Old Testament example, journeying through the wilderness, even if it had been like just a couple of weeks, it still wouldn't have been super comfortable, right? But you would have been happy to do it because you know where you're going. Now, unfortunately, they got stuck there for
40 years.
40 years, give or take.
Consequence.
Yeah, a little consequence there. And I love this example because the Israelites in the wilderness, they have perfect provision all the time, and they're getting absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
That it's only once they step into the promise of God being, hey, here's this amazing place. By the way, you're going to have to fight for it. Once they step over the Jordan into actually taking ground, aka they're not leaving for, okay, thank God, you know, the manna, fantastic. I have everything that I need. You take good care of me. I do like that song. That the blessing is within this sense of taking new ground, of expanding our limits, of doing something uncomfortable. That I think that was obviously a lot more dangerous and a lot more scary than being in the wilderness. You know? So there's this duality of, yeah, but I'm kind of comfortable with, you know, God's just meeting my needs and I'm okay and whatever, versus, oh, here's like this radical abundance and extreme goodness of God, but it's scary and it requires even more effort. But I think it's fun. This certainly plays out in my own life a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know about you.
All growth happens when you're in discomfort.
There is probably not much growth without discomfort.
Yeah.
Hey, one really practical question. If we have a culture of ownership in the church, and the goal is that as many people as possible, they have a sense of ownership. What are they actually doing? Because not everybody has a mic on a Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Let's get super practical.
Yeah. I mean, that comes down to understanding whether you're a foot or a hand or a whatever you are, like body, right? Like, we need everything. If everybody was called to be a preacher, we would have a pretty horrific Sunday service of everybody trying to have their voice heard, you know? And I think that comes down to also understanding what gifts you've been given, like, and knowing what you have to give to any given Sunday or any given church or your own life or whatever it looks like. It comes down to knowing who you are and what you've been created to do. Yeah.
Even though I am, let's say, in worship team and media team, and there's a microphone, so I'm using a microphone, you know, I don't do all the things in church, and also God doesn't ask me to do all the things. Like, I bet there's, like, you know, cooking for someone, or, you know, like, I don't do those things. I think, like, and this might easily seem I'm going to talk about your calling, and I'm not going to say that, because I think God calls you every half an hour for something, you know? So it's not about this is my calling as a dream. It's more as a, like, hey, God is calling you right now to call this person.
Yeah, 100%.
You know? So there's so much you can do in church, even if you're not, like, going to preach or something like that.
Can we just, like, break this? Sorry.
Yeah.
Just like this, I feel like a weight on this whole, like, there's this hierarchy of some things are better than others, like, in the church context. Because, like, there's a lot of the times, like, oh, I want to be on the worship team so I can be in the front, or I could preach, or, like, whatever. Be like, being on display also requires, like, a lot of battle usually, like, in the background. And actually the thing that has the most impact for people are the people who show up at the door and cook for somebody else in the church. You know what I mean? Like, when somebody's had a newborn, arranging a meal train or whatever, like, that is living as a body.
Church. Yeah.
Like, that is actual, like, it's more than a Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, that's congregation
and
honestly,
family. The preachers are just talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Honestly,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Pointing to the real life. You
Hey,
know, real life
let's everybody do this.
yeah. Or, like, seeing a mom who's really struggling with her kid, and, like, you can tell that she's so drained, being like, hey, can I watch your kids and you can go in and just listen?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Literally,
like,
there was once that Viivi did that for my kids, so thank you.
But, like, I think that is where there's value, like, really, if we get down to it. Like, we need to flip this script upside down of the things that we see as, like, oh, well, that's just, like, a little thing, and actually build it, like, that is what we're talking about without taking ownership. It's like being like, I see a need, I'm gonna act, I'm gonna do something about it, I'm gonna help, not just be like, oh, well, I want this kind of role for myself, or I want to be up there, and then try and make that happen for yourself.
And, you're talking about practical things. So, like, I know that, like, I probably said some philosophical things, but I would like to emphasize that the pragmatic is very much transcendental. That
I love Andre. Can we just have Andre on, like, just an Andre show?
Listen.
I love this.
Wait, I need to make my point.
Sorry.
That Jesus is there. When you're doing something for someone, you're doing that for Jesus. You've preached that on that. And it's amazing because, like, Jesus came 2,000 years ago as a man with a beard, and people had to, like, believe that is God. And that was difficult for people. And a lot of them got offended and did not believe. But then now in our era, we don't see Jesus as a physical man. Many of us would love to see him. But he has given the spirit of his son, which is the Holy Spirit. We have the Holy Spirit. And the body of Christ, which is us. So we have the heart of Christ, which is the Holy Spirit, and we have the body of Christ, which is us. So Christ is here. So the same way how people had to believe that this man is God, we have to believe that the church is
the
Jesus
body of
here.
Christ,
So we do these things, like helping people on a daily basis is like, look into their eyes and you see a little glimpse of Jesus there,
Again, you would do dishes if you were doing them with Jesus. If Jesus needed your help, you would be running to his side to help him, right? So if
And
Jesus
many
is
did,
in
right?
everybody,
And back in the days, they chased Jesus. He couldn't even rest.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I have an idea
for
of
it.
like 2 times where the ownership that Jesus has shown and like really touch me are the woman at the well where he stops for her and like everybody else goes off, right? And he stops there. And then when they're about to stone the woman, you know what I mean? And he stops. And something about it moves me because it's, again, about him understanding the cause and effect of his choice in that moment, right? Imagine the story that she gets to go and tell and how large of an impact it actually has with that little action that he takes in that moment to stop, to kohta, to encounter, to like bring somebody in. So I think that that's what it's all about, right? Like, so seeing Jesus in everybody, seeing what they're capable of, seeing their potential, seeing their heart, and then stopping and being like, okay, what can I do in this moment? How can I be of service?
Yeah, I just had another Jesus thing that I remembered. So the pragmatic is transcendental.
Yeah.
When Jesus washed the feet of the disciple, he wasn't just like, I'll just wash her feet, It was an act. Like, it meant something. These things that we do, we might not feel that they have a meaning, but they are an act. They might be the very last time that you do something for that person. Who knows? Maybe they might not live next week, There's been people in this church that are not alive anymore. We have to remind the weight, which is not a heavy weight. It's just like, sort of like an epic scale of these mundane things.
And I mean, it's, I understand where some of this misconception around this comes from. Like, you read Acts, is it Acts 5? Where is it where there's the Hellenistic Jews and their widows are being neglected and the whatever and all of this. And then it says that it's not right for the apostles to basically be waiting tables. This verse, I forget where exactly it is. And I think that this as well is not a question of the significance of the task.
Yeah.
It's a question of what is God asking you to do.
Yeah.
It is a question of obedience. It's a question of what has he actually spoken. And I think that this is a very important theme in this whole conversation that we keep coming back to, that this thing originates from relationship with God and with people, and the goal is relationship and connection with God and with people. So meaning that if God calls me if he calls me predominantly, if he says like, Samu, I want you to spend as much time and energy on teaching, for example, that's something that he has spoken to me. Yeah. And I just assume that, okay, well, fantastic, but I probably should be also doing all these other things. I should be on the cleaning team and the welcome team and the every team. I'm actually not serving well.
Yeah.
Because
100%.
I'm doing those things out of fear and people pleasing and comparison and afraid that, what will people think, and they'll think that I'm self-centered because I'm not doing the other thing, even though a lot of those things I still obviously do.
Yeah.
But then the opposite is true.
Yeah.
You have people who God has explicitly told them, hey, I want you to serve on the kids, but they're like, no, I belong on the worship team because I'm great. And that would be rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's like pursuing your own ego, right? At that point, you're just wanting to be at a certain level because you want to see yourself elevated.
But you might be like, well, God's given me these gifts, so certainly I must bring God glory with how
it's
gifted
true,
I am.
but sometimes you're called to first cultivate that and bringing God glory in your secret place and to like build that relationship with God. Again, relational, right? So you may not be also sometimes, like I've had this a lot in like close friendships where it's like somebody has a very, very strong like prophetic voice or, something and they're like, I'm going to be a voice to the nations tomorrow. And it's like, okay, God talked to you about it yesterday. Like you sometimes have to go on a journey in order to reach your destination. And a lot of the time it just comes through serving that we start to also understand the importance and to like learn things from other people along the way before we are elevated into whatever that position is.
Yeah, I think when someone says, or, God has given me these gifts, so I'm going to do it. I think a lot of times people use the word God and mean different things. Someone might say, God gave me these things, and they're just saying like, I believe I was born for this thing, They are not saying God as their father who they meet every day and they sit in their father's lap. They might be saying it as, I've said it before, so I'm not judging anyone. It might be saying as a supernatural excuse for saying something,
I think there's also a level of understanding that like God giving you a gift is also different than God giving you a calling, you know what I mean? Or like for example, for me, I'm an incredibly organizational and structural person. Yeah. But if I came into Northwind and I went, everyone has to operate like this is what we're doing, without you guys ever like hearing about me or like us building a relationship first and me coming to you and being, hey, this is a gift I've been given. How can I serve? How can this be useful? Is this useful? Is this needed? You know what I mean? Like it's, again, bringing yourself under leadership, under authority and going, where can I use this, what I have to give?
You said something very interesting that like you might be gifted but not called, right? So that might be a very frustrating situation when you're gifted with something but like you're not hearing God say that you use it.
Well, for example, right, we're all given prophetic gifts, but we're not all called to be a prophet. Or just imagine that like very realistic situation would be like, I have a gift with music, but God is not calling me to be in the worship team and the leaders are not talking to me. How do you deal with that? I think that when God tells you to step and do something, there might be all sorts of obstacles with that, ranging from I don't know how to do it to people don't like all kinds of problems. When he says do it, he will also give you the provision to do that.
The grace.
And when he says don't do it, there is purpose for that. For some reason he wants you to not do, like with Joseph in the captivity and in Egypt. He had like years and years of no. God had a purpose for that.
100%.
I have one idea of why he does it, because I've experienced this so many times in my own life, and I've discussed this on my own podcast, maybe even on the episode that we do on Talks with Me, that oftentimes I feel like why God says no is just to see how you'll react. Just to see how you'll react. And the frustration, the disappointment, the impatience, the comparison, the the rebellion, the God, you should have, and you told me, and why don't you, and all of these things. Like, I'm sure Joseph, he wasn't feeling super psyched at this part of his story, right? He's not like, oh, I'm so stoked to be in prison right now. But had he stayed in prison and started complaining and being like, God, you've left me, and why, and this isn't what I signed up for, and I'm such a victim because you've given me this like amazing gift, he would never have ended up anywhere, right?
Yeah, there's actually
because I'll just add that Psalms, actually, I forget where exactly, it's Psalms 100 and something, maybe Psalms 108, maybe. It says that God tested Joseph until. It literally says that.
Yeah, until.
God tried his character.
Until. Yeah, that's a very good point, because like of God saying no, see how you would react. There's been a case this year where I asked God, can I do this thing? And my expectation was, I want a yes. I want a yes.
Please say yes. Please say yes.
Please say yes. And then he asked me, like, how are you gonna react if I say no? And then I thought, and that way. And then how are you gonna react if I say yes? And this and this and this way. And then he said, okay, yes. And after this exercise, I realized, like, my whole approach to this thing that I now gonna do is totally different because of this exercise that God told me, hey, do this or that, you know? Basically, before, my motivations were like, let's say, selfish, or I was overly excited about something. But after that exercise where God showed me yes or no, I now did the yes, but with a serving attitude. You know, it's totally different. And I think it's just a father taking care of their kids. Like, if your kid comes up to you and they're all like dirty and stuff, and then they're like, hey, daddy, can I go play with the couch? And you're like, yes, just a minute, please. Go, son. You know, he's taking care of us when he does those kind of things. He's cleaning us of impurities in our motivations and things like that.
I love how this brings us back to, like, everything underneath this episode has been the heart motive and your heart posture and, like, all of that stuff, where it all starts from there. So sometimes when you have your no, sometimes it's not even a no, it's a not yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure. And I think that a lot of it comes down to dying to ourselves and just, like, dying to our own motives, dying to everything that is selfish inside of us, and genuinely being there to build God's kingdom, build the highway for when he returns, you know, because that's ultimately what we're here to do. Like, it's wonderful that we have community for all that it brings to us. I spoke about it in this episode. It's amazing what it can give us, but that's not the point. Like, the point is to build up the highway for when he comes back in glory, and when there's harvest and revival, and, like, for all of that, we all need to be playing our part and being a part of building the structure that is in place, the structure that has been given to us.
Yeah, that's huge, because again, like, God, okay, money is a great example in the sense that God does not need our money because he owns everything. But at the same time, this thing works at the pace of the heart of the church.
Yep.
So he needs our heart. He wants our heart. I love that verse in Corinthians that God loves the cheerful giver.
Yeah.
Like, sure, he loves the person who's not giving at all, right? He loves that too. But I think that the reason that it says that God loves a cheerful giver, I think you could translate it well that God is delighted in a cheerful giver, because he's not. It's like if someone gives you a gift that they kind of wish that they didn't have to pay for. Yeah. Or it's like someone, when someone gives you a gift and you're like, yeah, this is really expensive. So, like, don't lose it. Or whatever. Like, it's kind of like, right?
Yeah.
Not good.
So I think that's huge for this whole theme, because we're giving time, we're giving money. Actually, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
That's like, what do you think about, because ownership, a huge part of that, the way that I see it, is that I'm owning this thing financially.
Yeah.
Like, right now, as we're recording this, I'm not even working for the church. I mean, I'm working full time pretty much for the church, but I'm not employed by the church. Just because I have this sense of this is what God has entrusted me with. This is my family. This is the house that I'm building. This is whatever. How does money play into this? What do you think about the difference between giving time, giving money? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I would also like answering this, but also commenting on what Viivi said about dying to yourself. Dying to, like, how can you be a joyful dyer to yourself? Like, like.
It's so wonderful. Sorry.
So it sounds super like masochistic.
Contrary,
like,
yeah.
But like the thing is, there is your true self.
Yeah.
That you don't even know what it is. And then there's two sort of figures. There's God, the perfect all of all. And then there's this weird thing called my ego. So dying to yourself means I die to this ego thingy.
Yeah.
And I live for that. I live for that. So when it comes to money, it's like it is just a number.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean much other than it's just a system that people have created. So like it all comes from God, like, and it all goes to God. Like every single thing, these objects are all owned by God. It's like, how can we even have money? How can we even have anything? Like this is just a piece of cloth I put around my body, but it's not mine,
Yeah.
Like when you think about that in that way, like giving is just like, so what,
Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Level of neutrality has been like a huge lesson for me of like with all my material possessions, all of my resources is just coming to a level of neutrality with what it is. It's just a number, like that whole idea of it's just a number. It's an hour. It's a, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, like just understanding that there's like a level of neutrality towards everything. And I love talking about dying to yourself. Like, honestly, I could talk about this for hours. It's so good. Because it's been so hard for me, like along the way, but I can genuinely say like this season, or like the past autumn, was literally God asking me to place on the altar every vision that he's given me about my future. Like, and that was hard. Like it's been so hard because I believe that I've been given dreams. I believe that I've been given visions for my future from God, and he's given words. He's given, all of this kind of stuff. And then he says, but are you willing to put it on the altar?
Yeah.
Like, are you willing to give it up if I call you? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's a really good point, because like the figure I have is that you have your hands open and God gives them those things to you, and you keep your hand open. You don't close it and this is mine. You're just like, sure, God, So with that, it comes into your money, it comes into your time, it comes that understanding of like, that is all yours. That is all stuff that I've been blessed with. So therefore I will give freely because my hand is open. Yeah. And like as a testimony, I have given money stuff to church. I don't need to say what they are, but God has just blessed me after that, like financially. Like it's as if I didn't even give it, and I'm not saying this is necessarily going to happen to everybody, because sometimes it may be that you give to church and then it does not come back and you just get financially worse, and God has a purpose for that as well. But there should be no fear. There should be no fear. If you give, either give it joyfully and a lot, or don't give it all.
I like that.
Maybe.
Because I like that in the sense that if you remove the option of ticking the religious box to make your sense of self, kind of feel a little bit better about yourself.
Yeah.
I
pay
really, a couple hundred euros to be a good person.
Yeah. Even though, it's real and this thing is expensive and it takes a lot to run this.
Yeah.
But I absolutely agree that it just feels the money, again, I don't like receiving, I don't think God likes receiving something that we give wishing that we didn't have to give it,
Yeah. And I think it comes down to also like, do you believe that this is going to be a blessing? Do you see what this is going to accomplish? Every euro, even if it's just a euro that I'm able to put forward, like, do I believe that God will work his loaves and fishes miracle with that euro? And that could mean the harvest coming.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like every little, same thing as in like every little encounter is valuable and impacts the entire culture, impacts the entire community. Every little gift, financially, of your time, of anything, can have multitudes of like an expanse of impact. And I think that that's where it comes down to, is also understanding of like, okay, I'm giving, and this is what it's going to like
and this is actually
make possible.
If I just add this one more thing about money, that I think ownership in the sense of moving from their church or that church to their church to our church to my church mentality really changes, because if I view it as, you know, this is where I am, this is my family, this is my people, this is my church, whatever, I am not actually letting go of anything. I'm just reallocating it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I'm taking money from one pocket and putting it in another pocket.
Yeah.
Because ownership does that, right? If you would have, let's say you own a business. I think both of you guys, do you still own a business?
Yeah,
Both of you?
you
Yeah.
could say
So
so.
like if you would take money from your own account and put it in a business that you own 100%, you don't feel like, oh my God, I gave away all this money.
Yeah, it's just one.
Right?
one.
No, you just put it in a different account.
Yeah.
And then you're still, you know,
Yeah.
it's yours. So in the same way, sure, you might not be on our online banking system and deciding where exactly the money goes. But if there's this belief, this mentality of like, no, you know, God's actually put me here, and this thing is, you know, I belong to this thing and this thing belongs to me, then it removes all of that, like the like giving changes entirely.
I think there's a risk of I mean, not associated. Anyway, I'll just say that like some people might think, oh, I could do this and this and that with that money. And they may give like, I'm giving, but I'm letting go of that thing that I could do. I forgot what place in the Bible it is. You guys probably know what, like that, when you make a plan, you shouldn't say this is going to happen that day,
James.
but if God is willing, that will happen. So you don't know if you would do that thing with that money. What
Absolutely.
if suddenly there would be like a random cost that you have to pay, or
A $7,500 car bill.
or you have broke a leg, you can't do that thing anymore.
Yep.
You don't know. You are not in control. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just, I forgot the other point.
There's been moments where God's asked me to give, and then I'd be like, nah, but I really need the money. And then I haven't given the money in the moment, and then I have not enjoyed it
Yeah.
at all. It's being like, sure, it's not being like, you know, stealing something out of Jericho and then, you know, getting like stoned to death, but you just don't enjoy it. It feels like, it feels stolen, you know? It feels like driving a stolen car. Like you just can't enjoy it.
Yeah, that's true. Like there's no joy in disobedience.
Wow. Guys, we have to start wrapping this up. Before we wrap up, just one last thing. Let's touch on boundaries.
Yes.
I'll ask more specifically, how do you know if your, you know, lack of energy or whatever else is a sign that, hey, just chill, maybe you don't need to take like responsibility for that thing right now, versus where is God asking you to stretch and grow and etc.? How can you tell the difference?
I don't think that I'm qualified to tell somebody an answer to this, but I can tell you what it looks like in my life. And I think that in my life, I filter everything through my priorities. So if my family starts to fall apart, it means I need to take a step back from the church, because my priority goes God, my family, then the church, right? And then my business, and then, you know what I mean? All of this kind of stuff. So when I have a set, clear list of my priorities, I can filter that through my well-being as well. So am I falling apart? Like, actually, am I falling apart, or do I just need to take a nap? Like, you know, like really get down to it and know what it actually looks like. Is this lasting longer than it should? Is there something where I have been disobedient in this like filter? And it goes in that priority list. So, okay, is my connection with God good? All right, cool. Is my connection with my husband and my kids good? Okay, cool. We can move down, you know, the list into the next ones.
It's really good.
And then I filter up into where I need to cut back from. Because I think very easily we will, for example, be serving in the church, And when we're not feeling 100% in another area of our life, we will then start to cut back on how much we're giving to the church, because that's where it's manifesting itself, essentially, because we feel like we're in a safe environment to be able to like go through our
we
stuff.
overcompensate.
Yeah, exactly.
By having a sense of at least I'm really serving at the church, even though my marriage sucks.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So like in that sense, it's really helpful to go through that list in order to filter, okay, where is the problem actually coming from? Where do I actually need to pull my resources from right now? And then work our way up. Because a lot of the times it's actually from really small things that we do in our day to day that we can get a lot more energy into our days. For me, it's a lot of the time it's like a 15-minute like transition between like responsibilities, between a shift of roles from work role to mom role. Me having 15 minutes of silence before I go into the next role will change my entire life.
Yeah, I'm not very good at knowing my boundaries, but the Lord,
you're learning.
The Lord is.
Yeah.
And that's my quick answer for this. Like,
so good.
How do I know my boundaries? I ask God, A or B. Then he answers A or B. There's also some times when I know a clear answer from God, but my wife, I bring it to her and she might have a different answer, you know, and then I'm like, wait a minute, but God told me this. Those are the more difficult situations. And there's times when I have to believe that God is in the marriage and what Mess is telling to me, I have to go and submit to that. And there's times when I'm like, but wait a minute, God said so. I will very calmly and peacefully tell you that God told us, so we will do it, you know?
Yeah.
And there's no tip. I'm sorry. It's just life with God. And
I think that's really beautiful, though, because it comes down to building a relationship where you know how to hear God's voice, right? Like, I hear you and I'm like, wow, like that's so beautiful to be able to be like, okay, God, A or B, and actually hear him say A or B. Like, that's really awesome.
Do we have time to talk about listening to God?
No, we do not.
Another episode. Another episode.
Yeah. Another episode. But I think just as a comment on what you just said, I think I operate very much the same way, with the addition that this is something that I'm learning as well, is that whatever then I feel like God is saying, I just have to attach faith to it. And Steve Backlund talks about this a lot on the Igniting Hope podcast, that God loves a cheerful decider. That when you commit to something, whether it's like, okay, I feel like I'm not supposed to do that thing, even though I kind of wish that I could, then you're not doing it with joy.
Yeah.
Or if he says like, okay, no, we're supposed to do that thing. Then, for example, me walking here today with the man flu, I was like, I'm going to show up and have as positive an energy that I'm bringing, you know, just attitude as I can. You know, I'm attaching faith to that. And I'm for it with
I think like faith is, there's no like good faith and bad faith, kind of like you believed like the Bible doesn't talk about being inaccurately trusting God, you know?
Right.
It talks about, do you trust God? So once you trusted God with something, God doesn't just let you like alone with those decisions and like, oh, look at him doing some chaos, you know?
Relationship.
He backs you up because you believed in him.
Yeah.
Just like the woman who came and asked for Jesus to heal her daughter or son from demon possession. And
there's both.
And Jesus said like about the dogs and feeding the dogs.
The
she persisted in faith. He honored her faith.
So guys, this has been beautiful. I love it. I love it. There's so much that we could go into, but we won't. Maybe there'll be a part 2 someday. You can leave it in the comments, whatever. But hey, thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting.
This was beautiful. Thank you, Viivi. Thank you, Andre, and hope this blessed you guys a lot. We love you guys. Thanks for being here, and God bless you. Bye-bye.
Hei, kiitos, kun sä olit mukana kuuntelemassa tätä jaksoa. Sä löydät meidät netissä ja Instasta nimellä northwind.church. Ja jos sä haluat tulla käymään, niin kannattaa tsekata Instasta meidän kokousajat ja muut ajankohtaiset infot. Oot tosi lämpimästi tervetullut. Siunattua päivää.